Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk to you about my Boston Fern because it is not in good condition. I'm guilty of neglecting this one a little bit. Because it's a fern, it has to sit a bit further back behind a few plants because it doesn't like the too strong direct sun. And because of that, it's a little bit further away from my view and a little bit further away from the watering can. And I've got to say, over this winter, I maybe have left it longer than I should do to water it. And although it's okay, it's very much pulling to one side. I'll rotate it a bit for you. And you can see where it's been sat and it hasn't been rotated. It's growing all the way over there, straining for the light. Nothing on here, and at the back here, as you can see, there's a lot of dieback. There's a lot of dead fronds, and these are fairly forgiving plants, to be honest with you, but in this case I think it's really starting to struggle. So what I'm going to do is give it a little bit of care and love and attention, and it will be fine. It'll come back very strongly, and this spring and summer I'm sure it will put on a lot of new growth. I think it will be fine. I'm not sure about the pot. I don't think it's pot bound. These plants don't tend to grow out of their pot too quickly in my experience. You can certainly leave it a few years before you need to do that. So what I'm going to do is, while I'm snipping off some of the dead growth and getting that back to looking a bit more presentable, I'm going to go through some care tips and tell you what I should have done and what I didn't do. And so if you've got a Boston Fern at home, you can employ these techniques to make sure it's looking its best all year round, and we'll give you some propagation tips as well at the end. So let's get started. So I think I'll just use a little pair of snips because there's very fine growth with this Boston Fern. It doesn't need the secateurs. That's a bit much. So I'm just going to go through into the undergrowth a bit and snip them back. They will readily reshoot new fronds, and they will come out and be as big as these bigger ones. Once it gets going again, it gets what it needs. So it's not the end of the world, but obviously it's going to slow down the growth and the sort of lushness of the plant if you keep doing this too often. But they are fairly hardy, like I said, so they will take a bit of tolerance. Now, let's go over a sort of care guide for this particular one. In terms of light levels, less than normal. But having said that, if you want a really big, lush, actively growing plant, it will still need a reasonable amount of light. Not direct light. It doesn't want direct south-facing light coming on it. The leaves will scorch and burn. That's too much. So if you're going to have it in a really bright south-facing room, make sure it is way further back, maybe behind a few other plants. If you're creating a little scene with a few plants, put this towards the back. Or if you're in a room and you want to leave it in a room, then maybe put it 3, 4, 5 feet back from a window where it still gets light. The light is still coming in, but maybe not as harsh, because ultimately even the lower light plants like this will naturally grow on the floor of a forest or in a position that is getting naturally lower light. But the ones in the higher light areas without direct sun will grow better. They just will. So even the lower light ones, I like to give as much light as I can within reason, because it does make the difference on the plants. So likewise, they will tolerate a whole range. But what you may find, if you're in a darker spot, these will be fine, but they just won't grow very much. And if it's all right, and if you bought a nice big one from a garden centre, oh, it's nothing wrong with that. I like to grow them from a small thing to a big thing. That's rewarding for me. But if you're looking for a certain look in your house, that's absolutely fine. Buy a nice big one, put it where it looks best, you know, within reason, and it will be fine there because it is relatively tolerant of lower light levels. And just keep it watered and it will slowly grow a little bit over time, but probably not very much. And maybe that's good, because if you've got the size you want, you might not want it growing massive all the time, so that's fine as well. And get right into the undergrowth here and chop them back as deep down as you can without chopping any of the good growth out as well. Now when it comes to watering, I find that they do actually prefer a little bit more than usual. And take a look at the soil, because what you want is like an organic mix of water retentive soil, because again, in its natural environment, forest floor, very organic soil, nearly said something else, very organic soil that has leaf mulch in it, bark chippings maybe, and it will be a good loamy soil that will retain water. And that's what you want for these things. If it's too free draining, the water's just going to go straight through and it will be dry more often than not. And in fact, this pot here doesn't have any drainage holes. It's got no drainage holes, and I wouldn't normally advocate that, but in this case it just helps keep the water where you need it. If it's too free draining, then it's going to be an issue, and this one particularly will not worry too much. Obviously you don't want it boggy, you don't want to have water halfway up the pot and the roots constantly soggy. That's too much. But if you can water it to the point where it's nice and moist, it will stay that way for longer if you've got a better soil mix, and maybe in a pot like this. If you're new to houseplants, maybe don't put it in a pot with no holes, because that takes a little bit more skill to judge the amount of watering. You have to be more on the safe side, and then you can get it too little. So just to be sure, if you're not 100% confident, have holes in it, but make sure you've got a good water retentive mix. And higher humidity, it will appreciate more moisture in the air if you can get it. Now if you've got a humidifier for your houseplants, that's great, it's going to benefit that. If you can keep it in the kitchen or the bathroom where the natural humidity is more, even better. That's a great place to keep it. In a house, especially in Europe where we have central heating, it's a drier air environment, and you will get more of the leaves drying out on the ends. It's just the way it is. You can spray it if you want, but in my experience it has a limited effect. I've done some experiments years ago, you can check those videos out, where I've sprayed houseplants and checked the humidity levels, kept a humidity meter next to it, and it doesn't last very long. You might be lucky to have 20 or 30 minutes of raised humidity before that water evaporates, and as soon as that water has evaporated, that's not doing anything anymore. So a spray won't hurt it, but you'd have to be spraying your houseplants down once every 30 minutes to make a difference, and it's really not a practical solution. So a humidifier, maybe a humidity tray. You've seen me talk about these in the past. Have a look on the channel if you haven't. Just a tray, a dish with some pebbles or gravel, and you fill that with water. It's not designed to water the plant. The water can be below the surface level. That's why you have the pebbles or the gravel, but just there's water in there. And that water is designed to then evaporate over time, much longer obviously, because it's standing water. That's a bigger body of water, and maybe over 2 days that water, 2 or 3 days, that might slowly evaporate, and that you've got a constantly raised humidity level for that period of time. So all you've got to do is check it every now and again, put a little bit more water in that tray, and keep the water in around the area, and that will give you an extra few percentage increase in the humidity level. I think that's worth doing. So there we go. We talked about light. A little bit higher is good for this one, unless you want less growth, in which case you can go with lower light. Watering, the same. If you do, by the way, if you do put this in a more shaded area in your house where it is less natural light, then you don't want to be watering it as much, because it won't be growing as much, and if it's not growing as much, it's not using as much water. So water appropriately. You can't just say water this plant once a week or water this plant twice a week. You've got to do it based on the individual plant. Have a feel. Does the pot feel heavy or light? That's based on how much water there is in there. Get your hand in there, feel the soil. Is the top of the soil moist? Is it moist further down? have an idea and get used to how it feels and water it appropriately. If it's already moist, it doesn't need any more water. Humidity as much as possible. And finally, let's talk about propagation. Now these ones are clump forming, so it's propagation by division. So if it's getting too big, or you would like two smaller ones, then you can repot the plant very carefully, take it out of the pot, and then just don't be too shy with it, you know, get your hands in there and slowly ease the plant apart. It should come apart reasonably well. Just be careful with the roots. Make sure that each half of the plant still has enough roots. Tease it apart. You can use I've got a fork in here somewhere. As usual, it's not where it's supposed to be. You use a fork to tease it apart. You can put two trowels in there and slowly pull it apart. Whatever you want to do, just be a little bit careful and take your time. You can ease it apart, then you've got two plants for the price of one. Pot them up individually, and then eventually they will fill out and find their own way. It might look a little bit straight on one side, but get that on the side of the light and it will pull itself out eventually. So that's the way you get more plants. Best if you wait until you've had it a few years and it's grown out, and maybe it's got too big for the area that you want it. It's a good way to control the size and also get more plants as well. So that's a good way to do it. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this really. Keep an eye on it, keep that water level right, get the light level right, not too much, not too little. And if you, like me, forget it, then you can just prune out the darker dying fronds, and with a bit of luck, if it's not too far gone, give it a good water, give it the right amount of light, and give it a bit of time, and you should find your Boston fern will come back and give you plenty more years of really lovely looking lush undergrowth. I really do like the way these plants look. I think they're a great asset to any houseplant enthusiast. All right, that's it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Please give it a thumbs up if you found it useful or helpful. Subscribe for more houseplant related videos coming along very soon. Thanks for watching. See you again soon. Bye-bye.